Hey guys, welcome to Tiny Pots Melbourne. My name is Hamish, and as you may know, I love to make miniature pottery on a miniature pottery wheel. Today I'd just like to talk to you about some of my favourite tools and pieces of equipment that I use when I'm making tiny pots. As you can see, I've dug out my most used tools here from my toolkit, and I'd like to say a few quick words about them. I'm going to apologise in advance for any strange sounds you may be hearing. They're not coming from me, I promise. But it is in fact blowing an utter gale here today in Melbourne, so there's lots of rattling. I can actually hear some birds chirping away right now, so I apologise for any distracting sounds you may hear. The first piece of equipment I'm going to talk about is the wheel itself. This wheel is a very inexpensive pottery wheel that I got off the website AliExpress a long time ago. I got it so long ago, in fact, that the original listing for this wheel has disappeared, although you can still find some very similar machines on AliExpress. This was in the sort of lowest price range, which was around $50 Australian, and I've used a number of wheels in this price range, and they all suffer from the same issue, which is they're very low torque or very low powered in terms of the wheel itself. It's so low powered, in fact, that when it's running you can stop the pottery wheel with just one finger, and a lot of people find this to be an issue. What it really means is that you're limited to making pieces that are very small, and usually you'll have to use clay that is very soft. I do both of those things, and I enjoy using this type of wheel. I do have another pottery wheel here to show you though. This is a slightly more expensive wheel, and it's much more powerful. It's made by the company Homespun. It's an Australian company, and they actually gave this one to me for free in exchange for giving them some feedback. I should mention I'm not affiliated with Homespun in any way, I just like using their product. And this is a much more powerful wheel. It's got a really handy interchangeable bat system. My only issue with it is that it's made of plastic, and I use a blowtorch a lot of the time, so that's the reason that this isn't my main wheel. The first of my tools here that I'm going to talk about today is the scalpel. This is one of my most used tools because it's so handy for making tiny and fine adjustments to a pot. I use it for trimming tiny bits of clay off the mouths of pots, and I also use the flat edge sometimes to smooth the side of a pot. It's also very useful when used on the underside of a pot to clean it up a little bit. And I also use it as a scalpel for just slicing things like tiny handles, or slicing off a tiny teapot spout when I'm making it on the wheel. The next tool I'm going to talk about here is the metal ball tool. I have a number of these in different sizes, and they're incredibly useful because what I use them for is a sort of finger or hand substitute. When I'm pulling up the walls of a pot, it's really useful to just insert this ball tool into it and then gently pull up the walls that way. The larger balls are also useful for making adjustments to the necks of pots if I need to push them in slightly, because your fingers and hands have all these really useful curved surfaces in different gradients that you use all the time for making pottery and for all sorts of other things, of course. The different sized balls on these tools just provide a useful substitute for those surfaces. The ball tools also come in very tiny sizes as well, which I use all the time. The next tool I'm going to talk about here is this polymer clay tool, or polymer clay sculpting tool. These usually come in packs of about 5 with different shaped edges, But the one I use the most, or really the only one I use, is this one with a straight flat edge. I really just use it for one purpose, and that is to smooth surfaces on the outsides of pots. It's really useful just to be able to run this tool around the outside of a pot and to quickly smooth it down a little bit. The next tool I'm going to talk about here is my wooden knife tool, and as you can probably see, I've got a number of these in slightly different shapes. Lots of pottery tools are made out of wood because it doesn't stick to clay very easily, so it's really useful. These tools are really useful. I often use the pointed end of this tool to open the clay up when I first start off a pot, and I also use the knife end to clean the undersides of pots sometimes. Another really useful tool I have here is this tiny chisel. I have a number of these in different sizes, but the only size I ever seem to use is this one. It's really useful because it's got such a precise and flat tiny edge. This is just a 3mm wide chisel, and I use it to add a foot to the base of a pot sometimes, and I also use it to shape the mouth of a teapot where the lid is going to sit. Another really useful tool I have here is this tiny paintbrush. So this might be a surprising one, but tiny brushes have really found their way into my toolkit over the past few years. They're excellent for working with things like handles for mugs and teapots, and really anything that needs a very gentle touch. Often I might make a tiny handle for something on a tile, but it's just too fragile for me to pick up with my giant clumsy fingers. So I'll use sometimes one or sometimes two paintbrushes to gently maneuver it into position, and then often things will need a little nudge or a straighten at the end, and so I'll just use the tip of a paintbrush. Another tool that I use quite often is this tiny drill tool. I use this really just for one purpose, and that is to drill through the side of a teapot where I'm going to add a spout. But it's incredibly useful and I couldn't do without it. The last tool that I'm going to talk about here is one that I use on almost every pot, and that is my little blowtorch. This is incredibly useful, and I use it for just one thing, and that is to dry clay. If I need to add a handle to the side of a pot, then it needs to be of a certain level of firmness so that I can actually tap it into the pot without the pot becoming dented, and the handle itself also needs to be quite a specific level of firmness. So what I'll do is I'll just use my little blowtorch to dry the surface of the clay and to slightly dry the handle before I attach them. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If this was useful, I'd really appreciate a like or a subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.